November 6, 1860. Deep in the tobacco country of Central Virginia, a plantation owner celebrated Abraham Lincoln's election victory with his favorite Cuban cigars, hand-rolled by the one man he trusted above all others in his household. By dawn, he was dead. His lips were darkly stained, his fingers clutching at a throat that had swollen shut. The local physician recorded the cause as apoplexy brought on by excessive celebration. Within a week, the county sealed the records. But 70 years later, the doctor's private journal revealed something far more deliberate, far more calculated, and far more terrifying than anyone in that quiet community could have ever imagined. Tonight, we uncover what really happened in that smoking room and why 3 other men died in exactly the same way before anyone realized the connection. Before anyone noticed that one single person was always present at every celebration. Before we continue with the story of what happened in Buckingham County on that election night, I need you to do something. If you're listening from Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, or anywhere in tobacco country, leave a comment telling us what state you're from. This story touches every corner of the South, and I want to know just how close you are to where this all began. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because stories like this, buried for more than a century, are exactly what we uncover on this channel. The truth about that November night didn't surface all at once. It came in fragments, whispered confessions, burned letters discovered decades later, and one leather-bound journal that should have been destroyed but wasn't. Buckingham County, Virginia. In the autumn of 1860, it was a patchwork of rolling hills blanketed in tobacco plants, their broad leaves turning gold as harvest season neared its end. The county lay in the very heart of Virginia's tobacco belt, where fortunes were built on the backs of enslaved labor and where a man's social standing rose and fell with the quality of his crop. The soil here was dark, rich, and fertile. The air was thick with the sweet, earthy scent of curing tobacco drifting from the barns that dotted the landscape. The half-forward plantation sprawled across 12,200 acres of prime farmland, split by the Willis River and surrounded by dense forests of oak and pine. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a 3-story Georgian manor with white columns, black shutters, and a garden framed by magnolia and flowering dogwood trees. Behind it stretched the quarters where nearly 90 enslaved people lived, a small village of its own, with its own rhythms, its own whispered conversations, its own carefully guarded secrets. Colonel Marcus F. Ford ruled this domain with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. At 53, he was an imposing man, tall, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to streak through his dark hair, and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd earned his military title during the Mexican War, where he'd served with distinction and developed a taste for luxuries that no soldier's pay could satisfy. His marriage to Catherine Pembroke, daughter of a wealthy Richmond tobacco merchant, secured both his fortune and his place among Virginia's elite. The colonel prided himself on being a progressive plantation owner. He didn't use the whip as freely as his neighbors. He allowed his enslaved workers small garden plots and the occasional Sunday for themselves. Some were even permitted to learn trades beyond fieldwork, though reading and writing were strictly forbidden. These small mercies, he believed, made him enlightened, even beloved among certain circles in Richmond who called themselves forward-thinking, while still defending the very institution that made their comfortable lives possible. But there were things the colonel could not abide: insolence, laziness, theft, and above all, any suggestion that those he owned might imagine themselves as equals. For such offenses, punishment came swiftly and publicly. The overseer, a rail-thin man named Silas Portwood, carried out these punishments with mechanical precision, his face expressionless as he raised the lash or fastened the iron collar. In the rigid hierarchy of the half-forward plantation, one man occupied a unique position. His name was Benjamin, though everyone called him Benj. He had been born on the plantation 34 years earlier. His mother, Celia, worked in the main house until her death from fever when Benj was 12. Recognizing the boy's quick mind and steady hands, the colonel trained him in the art of tobacco preparation, a craft that took years to master and was worth its weight in gold. Benj had light brown skin, thoughtful dark eyes, and a quiet, watchful demeanor that made him easy to overlook. He was of average height, slim but strong from years of labor, his long fingers permanently stained brown from handling tobacco leaves. He rarely smiled, but he never scowled either. He moved through the plantation like water, always finding the path of least resistance, drawing no attention to himself, yet always watching, always listening. The colonel trusted Benj in a way he trusted few others, white or black. Benj had access to the colonel's private office, his study, even his bedroom, when delivering the special cigars the colonel favored. He knew which tobacco leaves to select, how to age them perfectly, how to add just the right touch of rum or brandy for flavor. He knew the colonel's preferences better than the colonel's own wife. What the colonel didn't know was that Benj could read. His mother had taught him in secret, using a battered Bible and discarded newspapers she'd stolen from the trash. She made him swear never to reveal that skill, warning him that knowledge was the most dangerous thing a slave could possess. After her death, Benj continued learning in stolen moments, reading whatever he could find, teaching himself about the world beyond the plantation's boundaries. He read debates from Congress. He studied maps showing free states and slave states. He even read about poisons from a medical text he discovered in the colonel's library, memorizing the symptoms of various toxins before quietly placing the book back on his shelf. He learned about belladonna and he learned about arsenic, about hemlock and foxglove, about all the deadly things that grew in Virginia's woods and gardens, each capable of killing a man if prepared just right. And he knew tobacco, not only how to cure it and roll it, but the science within it, the chemicals it contained, the dual nature of nicotine as both stimulant and poison, the razor-thin line between pleasure and death. The autumn of 1860 brought unprecedented tension to Buckingham County. The presidential election loomed, and the very air seemed charged with anxiety. In Richmond, politicians thundered about states' rights and northern aggression. In plantation dining rooms, men argued whether Virginia would follow South Carolina into secession if Lincoln won. And in the corridors, enslaved people whispered in the dark, wondering what might happen if the Republicans took power. Few dare hope for true freedom, but the word itself carried a dangerous kind of electricity. Colonel F. Ford was a Southern Democrat, a supporter of John Breckinridge, and a fierce defender of slavery, both as an economic necessity and as a divine institution. Yet he was also a pragmatist. He diversified his investments, kept business ties with northern merchants, and quietly hedged his bets against political upheaval. Some of his neighbors called this cowardice, even treason, but to the colonel, it was simply good business. 2 weeks before the election, he hosted a dinner party, inviting a dozen of the county's most influential men to discuss strategy. Benj served the meal, poured the wine, and listened, his expression calm and unreadable while his ears absorbed every word. They talked about mobilizing voters, about intimidating anyone who might dare support the Republicans, and about contingency plans should Lincoln somehow prevail. One man, a lawyer named Sutherland, declared that Lincoln's election might be the spark to ignite the powder keg of Southern independence. The colonel disagreed. Lincoln's election means nothing without congressional support, he said, waving a dismissive hand. The man's a backwoods lawyer with delusions of adequacy. He'll be hamstrung from day one. We'll weather this storm as we've weathered all the others. Our way of life is ordained by God and secured by economics. No amount of northern moral posturing can change that. As Benj refilled the colonel's glass, their eyes met for a fleeting moment. The colonel saw only obedience, the quiet, dutiful face of a servant. But Ben saw something else, a man who believed himself untouchable, a man who had grown complacent in his power, a man who had forgotten that the people he owned were still people, capable of thought, of patience, and of rage. When the guests finally departed, the colonel retired to his study for his nightly cigar. Benj followed with a tray, his favorite blend, a rich Maduro wrapped in a Connecticut broadleaf, aged for exactly 6 months. The colonel lit it with a satisfied sigh, Leaning back into his leather chair to savor the smooth draw, the perfect burn. "You've outdone yourself this time, Benj," he said, examining the cigar with admiration. "The flavor is exceptional. What did you do differently?" "Just a touch more aging time, sir," Benj replied softly. "And I selected only the finest leaves from last season's crop, the ones cured in the north barn, where the temperature stayed most consistent." "Well, whatever you did, keep doing it," the colonel said, chuckling. "These are the finest cigars I've ever smoked, and I've smoked Cuban tobacco that costs more than you're worth." Benj nodded. His face remained calm, his voice steady. "Thank you, sir. I'll prepare another batch for next month." The colonel never noticed that Benj's hands didn't tremble, that his voice didn't waver, that he showed no reaction at all to being valued less than rolled tobacco. Benj had long ago learned to bury his feelings so deep that even he sometimes forgot they were there. But they were there, waiting, patient as the tobacco curing in the barns. Election day arrived under gray November skies, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Polls in Buckingham County opened at dawn. Though only white male property owners could vote, a small fraction of the population. The colonel rode into town early, dressed in his finest suit, eager to cast his ballot and join the other men of standing at the courthouse to await the results. The news came by telegraph just before midnight. Abraham Lincoln had won. He'd carried the North decisively. Though he hadn't received a single electoral vote from the South, the mathematics of victory were undeniable. At the courthouse, the room erupted in outrage. Drunken voices shouted in disbelief, cursing the North, cursing Lincoln, cursing fate itself. The colonel returned to the plantation around 2 a.m, his carriage rattling up the dark drive at reckless speed. He stormed into the house shouting for his wife, for whiskey, for Benj to bring his cigars. Catherine at Fort appeared in her dressing gown, her face pale and frightened. The house servants emerged from their rooms, roused by their master's rage. "It's done," the colonel roared, his face flushed with drink and fury. "That rail-splitting bastard has won. But I'll be damned if it changes anything on my land. Do you hear me? Nothing changes here." He stalked into his study and slammed the door. Through the heavy wood, the household could hear him pacing, cursing, throwing objects across the room. Catherine retreated in silence. The servants exchanged glances and slipped back to their quarters, grateful not to be in his path. Only Benj remained, standing quietly in the hallway outside the study, waiting. He knew the colonel would call for him soon. The man always smoked when agitated, and tonight he would smoke more than usual. Benj had prepared for this moment. For months, he had been preparing. Ever since the day he decided he would no longer live as property, that he would rather die trying to be free than spend another decade serving a man who saw him as less than human. The preparation had been meticulous. Benj had access to the tobacco stores, to the curing barns, to every step of the cigar-making process. He had studied the medical text carefully, learning exactly how much concentrated nicotine extract could be absorbed to the mouth and throat before it became lethal. Too little, and the colonel would only grow ill. Too much, and death would come so quickly that suspicion would be inevitable. The key was patience. Gradual exposure, subtle enough that the symptoms could be mistaken for stress, for overindulgence, for age. For 3 months, Benj had been lacing the colonel's cigars, using extract rendered from the stems and the lowest grade tobacco leaves, the ones no one ever, parts normally discarded. He'd mix them with the rum used for flavoring, brush the extract onto the wrapper leaves, and even worked it into the binder. The doses were small at first, almost imperceptible. The colonel had suffered occasional nausea, brief spells of dizziness, but nothing serious, nothing that couldn't be blamed on rich food or too much wine. Benj observed closely, adjusting each batch, learning exactly how the colonel's body reacted, testing the limits, finding the threshold. Tonight would be different. Tonight, with the colonel already weakened by alcohol and rage, his heart pounding, his blood pressure high, Benj would give him the special cigars he had prepared for this very moment. The ones with 5 times the usual concentration. The ones that would finish what 3 months of careful poisoning had begun. The study door creaked open. The colonel stood framed in lamplight, his cravat loosened, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "Benj, where the hell are you? Bring me my cigars, the whole box, and brandy. The good French brandy." "Yes, sir," Benj replied evenly. "Right away, sir." He walked to the private closet where the colonel kept the cigars, a beautifully crafted humidor lined with Spanish cedar, maintaining the perfect environment for aging. Benj had prepared 2 identical boxes of cigars. One contained the colonel's usual blend. The other held death. He selected the lethal box and carried it into the study, along with a crystal decanter of brandy and a glass. The colonel had collapsed into his leather chair, his face buried in his hands. When he finally looked up, Ben saw something he'd rarely witnessed before, genuine fear flickering behind the fury. "Do you understand what this means, Benj?" the colonel asked, his voice trembling with anger. "That man Lincoln wants to destroy everything we've built here. He wants to tear down the entire social order, the very foundation of civilization itself." "It must be very troubling, sir," Ben said softly, setting down the box and pouring the brandy. "Troubling?" the colonel barked. "It's catastrophic. There will be war, mark my words. And when it comes, every man in Virginia will have to choose a side." He took the glass and drank deeply. Then, sighing, he added, "But not tonight. Tonight, I'll smoke and drink, and try to forget what's coming." He opened the cigar box and chose one carefully, examining it with blurry appreciation. "At least I still have these," he muttered. "At least I still have the finest tobacco in Virginia, and a man who knows how to prepare it properly." He struck a match, lit the cigar, and drew in the smoke, his eyes closing in momentary pleasure. Ben stood silently near the door, watching. The colonel smoked steadily, finishing the first cigar in under 20 minutes before lighting another. He drank more brandy. He ranted about Northern aggression, about states' rights, about the Constitution. His words growing slurred, his gestures sluggish. "You're a good Negro, Benj," he mumbled at one point, struggling to focus. "I've always treated you fairly, haven't I? Given you important work, trusted you with responsibilities. You're grateful for that, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," Ben said calmly. Inside, his heart pounded, but his face remained composed. "Very grateful, sir." The colonel finished his second cigar and reached for a third. His hand trembled as he brought it to his lips. He felt warm, unnaturally warm. "Must be the brandy," he muttered. But he lit the cigar anyway, inhaling the thick, poison smoke. The nicotine-coated vapors filled his mouth, his throat, his lungs, a toxin his body could no longer process. By the fourth cigar, the colonel's skin had turned an ashen gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. His breathing came in ragged bursts, each inhale more strained than the last. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed back into the chair. "Don't feel well," he gasped. "Something's wrong. Benj, get the doctor." "Right away, sir," Benj replied, but he didn't move. He simply watched. Watched the colonel's pupils dilate. Watched his fingers clutch at his chest. Watched the man who had owned him struggle for breath. The colonel's eyes widened as realization dawned. He looked at Benj, really looked at him, and in that instant, he saw past the mask of obedience and servitude into the cold intelligence and quiet fury beneath. "You," he whispered hoarsely, "you did this." Ben said nothing. He stood motionless, expressionless, as the colonel's breathing grew shallow, erratic. From his readings, Benj knew what came next. Nicotine poisoning sent the heart racing, while paralyzing the muscles needed for breathing. The victim remained conscious almost until the end, fully aware but powerless to stop it. The colonel tried to call out, but his throat had swollen shut. His words came out as a strangled wheeze. He reached out toward Benj, whether in appeal or accusation. Benj couldn't tell, and he didn't care. He watched as the colonel's hand fell back to the armrest, watched his eyes glaze over, watched his chest rise, then stop. The study clock chimed 4 times. Outside, the first bird began their pre-dawn song. Inside, the colonel slumped lifeless in his chair, his lips darkened by tobacco, for cigars burned down to ash in the tray beside him, and an empty brandy decanter glinting on the desk. Only then did Benj move. He stepped forward, checked for a pulse. None. He quietly collected the box of poisoned cigars and replaced it with the identical box of harmless ones. He arranged everything carefully, ensuring the scene told a believable story. That a man who had smoked and drunk himself to death in grief and fury on the worst night of his political life. Then Benj left the study, closing the door gently behind him. He walked to a small room in the servants' quarters attached to the main house, lay down on his narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. He felt nothing, no triumph, no guilt, no fear. Only an immense emptiness where feeling should have been, and the cold certainty that this was only the beginning. The household discovered the colonel's body at 7 that morning, when Catherine sent a maid to wake him for breakfast. The girl's screams brought the entire household running. Catherine took one look at her husband's gray, lifeless face and collapsed in hysteria. The overseer, Portwood, immediately sent a rider to fetch the doctor, sign of what he had done the night before. His movements were measured, unhurried, the same calm efficiency that had marked us every day on the half-forward plantation. He rolled cigars in the workshop adjoining the curing barn, his long fingers deftly shaping the tobacco leaves with the same precision that had once sealed a man's fate. No one noticed the faint tremor beneath that control, the pulse that beat a little faster whenever someone passed too close. That night, he began to prepare. In the small space behind his sleeping quarters, he had hidden a bundle wrapped in coarse linen, bread, dried meat, a water flask, a small knife, and a compass stolen from the overseer's desk months earlier. But his most valuable possessions were not material. They were the things he carried in his head: names, numbers, maps, the intricate web of secrets he had gleaned over years of silent observation. For days he waited, watching for the right moment. Portwood was growing careless. With Catherine preparing to leave, the overseer had begun drinking heavily, his cruelty sharpening into recklessness. Benj endured it in silence, never flinching, never responding, but each blow of the lash he witnessed against another man hardened something inside him further. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. 3 nights before Catherine's departure, a violent storm swept across Buckingham County. Thunder rolled over the hills, lightning illuminated the plantation in jagged flashes, and rain came down in sheets so thick that the air itself seemed to dissolve into water. Portwood had gone to the barn to secure the wagons, shouting orders over the wind. Benj waited until the man was fully occupied before slipping into the main house through the side entrance. The key he'd forged still fit perfectly. He unlocked the colonel's bedroom first. The gold was exactly where he remembered, in a small iron safe beneath the floorboards, hidden under a heavy Persian rug. It took him less than 10 minutes to pry the boards loose and retrieve the coins. There weren't as many as he'd imagined, perhaps 3 dozen in total, but enough to buy passage north, enough to buy a life. He replaced the boards, locked the safe, and moved quietly down the hall to the study. The smell of old tobacco and brandy still lingered faintly, ghosts of that November night. He paused for a moment, looking at the leather chair where the colonel had died, the burn marks on the desk where cigars had smoldered to ash. It felt like stepping back into a grave. He crossed the room, opened the top drawer of the desk, and took a small envelope, letters of credit bearing the colonel's seal. Worthless to most, but invaluable to someone who knew how to use them. He slipped them inside his shirt and turned to leave, then froze. A sound behind him. Benj. It was Catherine Halford. She stood in the doorway, her dressing gown clutched at her throat, a candle trembling in her hand. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes wide with shock and exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "You have no business in this room." Ben straightened slowly, his mind racing. I heard a noise, ma'am, he said evenly. I thought someone might have forced their way in during the storm. Catherine's eyes flicked to the open drawer, then to the rug that hid the floor safe. Her expression hardened. You're lying. She stepped forward, setting the candle on the desk. Marcus trusted you, she said, her voice trembling between fury and grief. He said you were different, that you were loyal. I should have known better. I should have sold you with the others after he died. Ben said nothing. There was nothing to say. Outside, thunder cracked like cannon fire. Inside, Catherine took another step forward. Put it back, she demanded. Whatever you took, put it back, and maybe I'll forget this happened. Benj met her gaze. For the first time, he spoke without lowering his eyes. You already forgot too much, ma'am. Her face blanched. What did you say? The night he died, Ben said quietly, you forgot what kind of man he was. You forgot the screams from the corridors. You forgot what it cost to keep this house standing. Catherine's hand went to her mouth, trembling. You're confessing. I'm not confessing, Benj interrupted softly. I'm remembering. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the windows. Then, without another word, he stepped past her. She didn't move, didn't call for help. Perhaps she couldn't. Perhaps she understood, in that moment, that everything her husband had built was already crumbling, that nothing she said would stop the storm that was coming. By dawn, Benj was gone. He followed the river north, keeping to the woods, traveling by night and resting by day. He crossed into Albemarle County by the second morning, then turned east toward the Blue Ridge foothills. The land rose gently, the trees growing denser, the air colder. Every mile took him farther from the world that had owned him, closer to the one that might never accept him, but at least would not chain him. For weeks, he moved like a shadow, stealing food from unattended farms, avoiding patrols, sleeping in barns or under the open sky. Once, he heard gunfire in the distance, Union scouts, perhaps, but he didn't stop to find out. Freedom was not a destination. It was a direction. When at last he crossed into Maryland, exhausted and half-starved, he found himself on the edge of a small town flying the Union flag. A woman at a church door saw him stumble and rushed to help. She asked his name, where he'd come from. He thought for a long moment before answering. Benjamin Freeman, he said finally. It was a lie, but one that, for the first time in his life, belonged to him. Would you like me to continue the story to show what happens to him after he reaches the North, how his knowledge of Confederate secrets changes his fate during the war, in superstition or bad air, but in the slow, lingering vengeance of one man's careful craftsmanship? When Benj left Virginia, he hadn't taken everything. In his haste, he'd left behind more than a few cigars, half a box, hidden beneath a false panel in the humidor. Each one was identical to the Colonel's favorites, each one prepared with the same precision, the same deadly patience. Over time, the cigars aged, their wrappers darkening, their scent deepening. To any smoker, they would seem a connoisseur's treasure. Years passed, and those cigars passed with them. When the Richmond speculator bought the plantation, he found the humidor in the Colonel's study, still intact, still aromatic. He fancied himself a gentleman, and when he lit one of the cigars, he congratulated himself on inheriting such fine taste along with the property. A week later, he was dead. The overseer who took his place found the cigars again and thought them too valuable to waste. He sold them one by one to officers and merchants passing through Buckingham County, spreading Benj's silent handiwork far beyond Plantation's walls. The poison traveled with them. In Richmond, in Lynchburg, in Charlottesville, reports circulated of men dying suddenly after heavy smoking. Most were dismissed as heart attacks or worse strain. No one connected the pattern. No one thought to trace the tobacco back to a dying plantation in the Virginia hills. By the time the war ended, the Halford estate was a ruin. The house stood empty, the windows broken, the gardens overrun with weeds. Locals avoided it after dark. They said the smell of cigar smoke still drifted from the study on cold nights, that a shadow sometimes appeared in the lamplight behind the curtains. A tall man, silent, watchful. In 1867, after Reconstruction began, a northern journalist named Elias Kent visited Buckingham County to write about the collapse of the old plantation system. He'd heard the stories about Ford House, the curse of tobacco, the chain of deaths, and he was determined to separate myth from fact. The housekeeper who tended the empty estate led him through the dust and cobwebs. The study was exactly as it had been left. The same desk, the same leather chair, the same faint scent of tobacco clinging to the air like memory. On the desk sat the humidor, its brass fittings dull with age. Kent opened it. Inside were 3 cigars, perfectly preserved, their wrappers oily, their aroma rich and intoxicating. He took one. That night, at the inn where he was staying, he wrote in his journal about the legendary Ford cigars, describing their smooth texture and aged perfection. His final entry ended with a line written in a shaking hand. A strange bitterness lingers on the tongue. I feel unwell. He was found the next morning, slumped over his desk, his skin gray, his lips darkened. The cigar beside him had burned to ash. Dr. Grimby, older now, frail, his hair gone to white, was called one last time. When he saw the corpse, he knew immediately. The symptoms were the same. He opened the humidor and looked down at the remaining cigars, his hands trembling. Then, without a word, he took the box outside, doused it with kerosene, and set it alight. The smoke rose thick and black, curling into the gray Virginia sky. No one ever spoke of the Ford Plantation again. The house eventually collapsed in on itself, reclaimed by vines and time. Only whispers remained, of a man who'd turned the master's indulgence into his justice, of cigars that carried death across years and miles. And somewhere in Boston, an older man named Benjamin Ford would occasionally pause at the smell of burning tobacco, close his eyes, and allow himself the faintest hint of a smile. Would you like me to write an epilogue set years later, showing what becomes of Benjamin in the Reconstruction era? Perhaps when he is finally confronted with what his legacy has become. After the colonel's death, and was never seen again, voters began to suspect that this Benjamin had not simply escaped, but had left behind a legacy far more deliberate, a slow, invisible vengeance sealed in cedar and tobacco. He reconstructed the timeline from Grimby's notes and estate records. Benjamin had worked in the colonel's office, had free access to his private stock of cigars, and was known for his precision and care. In the months before his disappearance, there had been several unexplained orders for large quantities of raw tobacco extract, records that had never been questioned because they came from the colonel's own accounts. Then Benjamin vanished, and the deaths began. Vorders wrote in his report, "It appears likely that this man, Benjamin, possessed knowledge of the toxic properties of nicotine and employed it with extraordinary patience and cunning. His actions, while criminal by definition, reveal an intelligence and restraint that challenge our conventional notions of both servitude and justice." The report was never published. The sheriff advised against making it public, fearing it would stir up dangerous sympathies during the already tense Reconstruction years. Officially, the Ford Plantation was listed as abandoned property. The remaining cigars were collected and destroyed under Dr. Vorder's supervision, though local stories claimed that not all of them were found. In the decade that followed, the plantation fell further into ruin. The main house collapsed during a storm in 1889, and the land was eventually reclaimed by a forest. But among the older families of Buckingham County, the legend endured of the enslaved man who took his vengeance not with blood and blade, but with science and patience, of the poison that smoked its way through generations of oppressors. By the early 20th century, the tale of Benj the chemist had become local folklore, told in hushed voices around fires and at taverns. Some claimed his ghost still walked the overgrown fields, carrying a box of cigars. Others said that deep in the woods, in the remains of the old study, one could still smell tobacco, sweet, acrid, and faintly bitter, like the memory of justice long delayed. But history, unlike rumor, has its own quiet persistence. In 1927, during a survey of Civil War-era properties, a state archivist uncovered Dr. Grimby's and Dr. Vorder's journals in a trunk stored in Richmond. Inside were the detailed notes, the chemical analyses, and a single surviving cigar sealed in glass. The label read in faint ink, "Property of Colonel Hafford." It was tested again, this time with modern equipment. The results confirmed what Grimby had suspected 60 years earlier. The cigar contained nearly 5 times the normal concentration of nicotine. The archivist's report concluded succinctly, "Evidence supports a hypothesis that the deaths at the Hafford plantation were the result of deliberate poisoning by an enslaved individual known as Benjamin, whose subsequent fate is unknown." And so, at last, the truth surfaced, buried for decades beneath myth and moss, whispered in the smoke of every story told about that Ford estate. Benjamin had won, not through rebellion or flight alone, but through a brilliance that turned his master's own indulgence into the instrument of his undoing. His act was both vengeance and testament, a final declaration that even in bondage, the human mind could remain free, calculating, and capable of justice no master could comprehend. Would you like me to continue the story a bit further, perhaps with a haunting or a modern-day discovery connected to the old plantation? It could serve as a powerful closing chapter for the narration, them to unknown causes related to chemical contamination of tobacco. It was, he decided, the closest thing to truth the world was ready to hear. He filed a report among his medical papers and never spoke of Benjamin Freeman again. Years later, after Vorder's death, his notes and journals were donated to the archives of the Medical College of Virginia. There, they gathered dust, largely ignored by historians who dismissed them as obscure 19th century casework. It wasn't until the early 20th century that the story resurfaced. In 1910, a graduate student researching early toxicology discovered Vorder's files. Within them, she found the doctor's meticulous documentation, sketches of human anatomy affected by nicotine, the chemical analysis of cigars, and a brief, cryptic line written in the margin of one notebook: "Justice through smoke." Intrigued, she published a short paper about the mysterious poisonings at the Hafford plantation, drawing cautious attention from academics and journalists alike. But even her account omitted the central figure. Benjamin Freeman's name never appeared in print. To the world, the story remained an unsolved curiosity, a Virginia mystery, where fate or nature, not human will, had brought death to the guilty. In Boston, however, the name Benjamin Freeman did appear, though only in census records and church registers. He lived quietly until 1883, respected by his neighbors, known for his sharp intellect and calm demeanor. He was remembered as a man who loved his books and his family, who never spoke of his past in Virginia. When he died at the age of 61, his obituary described him simply as a self-made man, industrious and well-regarded. No one knew that his quiet dignity had one of the most intricate acts of vengeance in American history. Nearly half a century later, during the 1930s, a team from the Works Progress Administration documented local folklore across Virginia. Among the stories they recorded was one about a haunted plantation, where cigar smoke drifted through empty halls and where, as the locals said, the white men who owned it always died with cigars in their mouths. The tale had changed over time, transformed from fact to legend. Yet at its core, it still carried the truth Benjamin had written in his letter, that justice had been done not by ghosts or curses, but by a man once enslaved who refused to die powerless. Today, the land would have Hafford Plantation once stood lies overgrown and silent. Nothing remains but fragments of brick and the faint outline of the old foundation. On summer nights, locals say the air still carries a faint scent of tobacco, sweet, bitter, lingering, like the memory of smoke rising from the ashes of history. Graduate student Eleanor Price began searching through related archives and private collections, hoping to uncover more about this mysterious figure. What she eventually found changed her entire dissertation and would later become one of the most haunting case studies in the history of American medicine and resistance. Through cross-referencing letters, legal documents, and plantation inventories, Eleanor reconstructed Benjamin Freeman's life in remarkable detail. She discovered shipping manifests listing tobacco exports from the Half-4 plantation, identifying barrels personally inspected and sealed by Benj, as he was recorded at the time. She found partial correspondence between Dr. Grimby and his Richmond colleagues, which referenced peculiar cases of apoplexy possibly related to tobacco compounds. The deeper she dug, the clearer the pattern became. Eleanor realized that Benjamin Freeman's act had not been an impulsive moment of rebellion, but a calculated campaign of delayed vengeance, executed with intelligence, precision, and an understanding of chemistry rare for his era, especially for an enslaved man denied formal education. In her notes, Eleanor wrote, "Benjamin Freeman represents something extraordinary, the intersection of intellect, oppression, and moral justice. His actions were terrible by conventional ethics, yet they expose the hypocrisy of those same ethics when weighed against the brutality of slavery itself." Eleanor's dissertation, defended in 1960, caused a minor academic scandal. Some historians accused her of romanticizing murder. Others hailed her as the first to document a verifiable instance of chemical resistance within the system of American slavery. Her research suggested that Freeman may have learned about nicotine extraction from observing plantation experiments with pesticide mixtures or reading fragments of agricultural manuals. In a later interview, Eleanor reflected, "Benjamin's brilliance lay not in the act of killing, but in transforming the very substance of his oppression into a tool of liberation. Tobacco enslaved him, and he turned it into a weapon." The story might have ended there, confined to academic circles, if not for a journalist named Thomas Harlan, who stumbled upon Eleanor's dissertation in the late 1970s. Harlan, a writer for a historical magazine specializing in forgotten American mysteries, saw in Freeman's story the makings of something larger, a symbol of retribution and intellect suppressed by history. His article, "Smoke of Justice: The Forgotten Vengeance of Benjamin Freeman," was published in 1979. It drew national attention. For the first time, the tale of the Half-4 plantation was told not as folklore, but as fact. Readers were stunned by the quiet horror of it. The enslaved man who had mastered his master's vice, the cigars that killed generations of men who profited from bondage, and the curse that was never supernatural at all, only human, deliberate, and just. After the article's release, historians revisited the Half-4 case. The old plantation records were examined anew. The ruins of the main house were excavated. Among the artifacts unearthed was a scorched fragment of a wooden cigar box, its Spanish cedar lining still faintly aromatic even after nearly a century. Burned into its underside, barely legible, was a single carved initial, B. Eleanor Price, then in her 60s, was invited to the excavation site. Standing amid the overgrown remnants of plantation, she remarked quietly to a reporter, "The soil remembers what men forget." By the late 20th century, Benjamin Freeman's name had entered a different kind of folklore, this time among black scholars, artists, and writers who saw in him a symbol of intellectual defiance. Plays, poems, and novels reimagined his life, some portraying him as a tragic hero, others as a grim avenger whose revenge became legend. The true Half-4 plantation no longer existed. The land was eventually converted into a public park in 1993. A small historical marker, installed near the site of the old study, reads simply, "Havard Plantation, EST 1814, destroyed 1889. Here stood the estate of Colonel Marcus Halford." In the 19th century, several unexplained deaths occurred on this site, later attributed to tainted cigars. The story of Benjamin Freeman, an enslaved tobacconist who sought justice through knowledge, endures as part of Virginia's hidden history. Today, visitors still report the faint scent of tobacco on certain humid summer nights, drifting through the trees long after the last ember died out. Some say it's just the soil, rich with the remnants of the plantation's crop. Others whisper it's something else, an echo of Benjamin Freeman's silent triumph, a reminder that even in a world built on cruelty, intellect and patience could burn brighter than hate. And perhaps in that quiet smoke lies the truest form of justice, one that leaves no trace but the memory of its purpose. He listed it to unknown parties, likely among the formerly enslaved population. Their identities uncertain, their whereabouts unknown. He filed this report with the sheriff's office and considered the matter closed. If Benjamin Freeman was now living peacefully in Boston, married, working an honest trade, what purpose would prosecution serve? The man had once been property, under the laws that governed Virginia for decades. He had no rights, no protection from abuse, and no hope of justice through any legitimate means. He had created his own justice, and Dr. Vorders could not bring himself to condemn him for it. The Half-Ford Plantation remained unsold through the 1870s and into the 1880s. The building slowly decayed, swallowed by vines and weather. Local children dared each other to approach after dark, inventing ever more terrifying tales about what haunted the place. Sometimes someone would sneak inside, but they never stayed long. "The house feels wrong," they'd whisper afterward. Too quiet, too heavy with the weight of old suffering. During this long abandonment, something remarkable began to happen. Formerly enslaved people from the Half-Ford Plantation, now scattered across Virginia and beyond, started sharing stories among themselves. In churches and meeting halls, in whispers carried far from white ears, they spoke of Benj. Most had remembered him as quiet, unremarkable, a man who kept himself and did his work without complaint. But now memories surfaced. The way he had sometimes watched the colonel with that unreadable look, how he always seemed to know things he shouldn't know, and how he disappeared the same week the colonel died. Some swore they'd known all along. Others admitted they'd suspected, but had kept silent, understanding that silence was the only protection they could offer him. In Richmond's growing black community, a few elderly men and women who had once been enslaved would tell younger generations about the tobacco man who made his master smoke death. The stories were never specific, always vague enough to deny knowledge, but the message was clear. Resistance was possible, even for those who seemed powerless. One woman, once enslaved on a neighboring plantation, told her grandchildren in 1891 about a conversation she'd had with Benj years before his escape. It was at a quilting bee where enslaved people from nearby plantations had gathered. He had been quiet, as always, until he said something that stayed with her forever. Tobacco built this world. Maybe tobacco can tear it down too. She hadn't understood at the time. Only later, after the death began, did his words take on their full meaning. The decay of the Half-Ford estate mirrored the greater transformations sweeping through Virginia during Reconstruction and beyond. The old plantation system had collapsed, replaced by sharecropping and wage labor, a system only marginally better than slavery. Yet the land itself became symbolic of something deeper, the impermanence of what had once seemed eternal, and the fragility of those who believed themselves untouchable. By the time the main house burned in 1889, the property had become a place of superstition and dread. No developer would touch it. No farmer would build near the old house site. The ground itself seemed cursed, though it wasn't the soil that was poisoned but memory. The legends grew with each telling. Strange lights in the ruined windows, phantom tobacco smoke drifting through empty rooms, the sound of footsteps pacing the study where so many had died. What people rarely said aloud, but many knew in their hearts, was that the real curse on the Half-Ford Plantation was the curse of slavery itself. The estate had been built upon human suffering, sustained by violence and cruelty. When that foundation fell, everything built upon it collapsed as well. To some, the deaths of the white men who had profited from that land seemed like justice. To others, coincidence. But everyone agreed the place was better left alone. In 1896, 2 years after Benjamin Freeman's death in Boston, a black newspaper in Richmond published a mysterious and signed obituary notice. It read, "Benjamin Freeman, formerly of Buckingham County, died in Boston at age 68. He was a tobacconist of great skill, known for the care he took in his craft. He leaves behind a wife, 3 children, and a legacy that some will understand and others never will. May he rest in the freedom he earned. White newspapers ignored it, but across Virginia and as far north as Philadelphia, black publications quietly reprinted the notice. The land itself was eventually subdivided and sold to small farmers who planted corn and wheat instead of tobacco. None of them built on the original house site. They chose plots far from the plantation's heart. Over time, the original boundaries faded, and the memory of what happened there slipped into legend, just another ghost story. Dr. Edmund Vorders died in 1895, taking his knowledge of Benjamin Freeman's confession to the grave. His papers were donated to the Medical College of Virginia, where they sat untouched for decades. Dr. Grimby's journals were given to a local historical society, cataloged but unread. It wasn't until the 1930s that a researcher studying pre-Civil War medical records stumbled across both collections and realized their connection. By then, everyone involved had long since passed. If Benjamin Freeman had lived to old age, he would have been over 100 years old. The researcher published a brief article in a regional history journal, speculating about the mysterious deaths at the Half-4 Plantation, but without any firm conclusion. The truth remained hidden in plain sight, buried in journals and letters, waiting for someone to piece it together. That moment finally came in 1958, when a graduate student at the University of Virginia, researching plantation life in Buckingham County for her dissertation, found Vorders' unpublished account among his papers. The account mentioned a letter from a man named Benjamin Freeman, but the letter itself was gone, destroyed by Vorders. Intrigued, the student cross-referenced the name with Boston city directories from the 1870s and 1880s. She found a Benjamin Freeman listed as a tobacconist on Beacon Street, married to a woman named Harriet with 3 children. The business had thrived for more than 20 years before Freeman's death in 1894 at the age of 68. Further research uncovered a short obituary in a Boston paper describing Freeman as a respected member of the community, a deacon at his church, a skilled craftsman known for the quality of his tobacco. It made no mention of his birth in slavery or his origins in Virginia. He had built a new life, a new identity, and carried his secrets with him to the grave. The student included these findings in her dissertation, though she framed them carefully, suggesting, but not claiming outright, that Benjamin Freeman had poisoned Colonel Halford and others. She wrote that if he had done so, his actions revealed a degree of intellect and planning that challenged long-held assumptions about the capacities of enslaved people. Her dissertation was accepted but remained largely unread. The full story of the Half-4 Plantation stayed obscure, known only to a handful of academics and local historians. The land continued its quiet existence as farmland, its grim history forgotten by those who now work the soil. But truth, once uncovered, has a way of surviving. In the 1980s, another researcher, writing a book about slave resistance in Virginia, found the graduate student's dissertation and recognized its importance. Digging deeper, she uncovered shipping records showing Halford importing Cuban tobacco and account books detailing cigar production. In 1992, she published Poison Tobacco, Benjamin Freeman and the Halford Plantation Murders. The book presented the full story, drawing from every available document, including excerpts from Grimby's and Vorders' journals. It stirred academic debate and mild controversy. Some scholars doubted the evidence was enough to prove Freeman's guilt, but for most readers, the truth was clear. Benjamin Freeman had been born into slavery, endured 34 years as property, educated himself in secret, and finally struck back, using intelligence, patience, and the very crop that made Virginia rich. He turned tobacco, the foundation of the plantation economy, into a weapon of rebellion. He didn't kill with rage or violence, but with precision, crafting poison cigars that mimicked natural death. He escaped to freedom, built a prosperous life, and never revealed what he had done. He proved, in the most profound way possible, that enslaved people were human, capable of intellect, strategy, and defiance. He showed that they could plan, act, and reclaim power from their oppressors. And he did it all with cigars. The same tobacco that symbolized Virginia's wealth, the crop grown through suffering, became the instrument of its downfall, at least in one corner of Buckingham County. The masters, quite literally, smoked their own destruction, inhaling the concentrated essence of their crimes. Benjamin Freeman lived free for 34 years, exactly the same number he had spent enslaved. He died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by family, his secrets intact. He was buried in Boston beneath a simple headstone that read, Benjamin Freeman, 1826 to 1894, beloved husband and father, now at rest. The Half-Ford Plantation is farmland now, divided among many owners, its dark past known only to historians and those who still whisper its story. The buildings are gone. The tobacco barns have rotted away. The slave quarters where 90 souls once lived have returned to forest. But the land remembers. The soil, rich with blood, sweat, and tears, remembers. And somewhere, in archives, in journals, and forgotten letters, the truth waits, ready to be discovered again by each new generation that asks. What really happened that election night in November 1860, when a slave killed his master with poisoned cigars and walked away into freedom? This is the story of Benjamin Freeman, tobacconist, deacon, father, and murderer. It's a story of revenge and resistance, of patience and intellect, of a man who refused to remain property and decided to act. Whether you see him as villain or hero depends on where you stand, but his actions are undeniable. He turned the very symbol of oppression into the instrument of liberation, proving that even the powerless can strike back if they are clever enough, patient enough, and willing to face the consequences. What do you think of this story? Was Benjamin Freeman justified in what he did? Or do two wrongs never make a right, even under slavery? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story captivated you as much as it did me while researching it, hit that like button, share it with friends who love dark history, and subscribe for more untold stories from America's haunted past. There are more secrets buried in the archives, more forgotten truths waiting to be unearthed. Join me next time as we dig deeper into the shadows of history. Until then, remember, the past is never really dead. It's not even past.